hit immediately. Great to have you. Today we are talking about game loops, TypeScript game loops. This is a topic that we need to get into if you want to think like a programmer. We've done a lot of like elements that can be a part of a game, but not so much that are the whole thing. So to think about the whole game loop, that's what we're going to be talking about today. First thing you need to note, there's a chat. Feel free to ask questions. If I don't go into the topic deep enough, we have that. My goal is less than an hour on this video. So we are going to be keeping this very surface level. And it's mostly about the coding that happens to make things happen. You will have to add your own visual effects, visuals, whatever it is that you want to actually do with these on your own. But today we're really just talking about like what creates the loop, how do you reset the loop, and we'll do some sort of visuals to actually see it. All right. Do let me know in the chat if you can hear me and everything's coming through nicely. Next up, let's dive into Horizon. And thanks for joining. Sorry. So nervous. This is a big topic. So here we are in the Horizon desktop editor, as we usually are. And what we need to do is start thinking about our game in terms of spaces. Now this was built using the, this was the previous video that just released, the gun, or the projectile launcher, I should say. And so I'm going to just delete everything that's in here. Thank you guys for joining. So good. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you. And so we're going to delete all the things. We don't need any of this. But what we do need to do is think about how do you get into the game. And we're going to start by creating zones. Now, these are just visual indicators. They're not obviously real zones, but we want to indicate where we're at. And so this first one is going to be our teleport. This is going to be the join game zone. We can set the tint color and tint strength, as you've seen me do in several videos now. We're going to change the scale on this 10 by 10 to 0.25. So 0.25. There we go. So this is our join game, and we'll set that to 0.01, just above the bottom of the ground. Set that to 0 and 0, and then let's turn motion snapping on and slide that forward just a little bit. I don't like that it's not even, so let's change this to 0.2, so it takes up 2 meters by 2 meters. Very nice. So this is going to represent the joining the game. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate this, and now we're going to create a game area. So this is going to represent where the game is taking place, and we'll change the scale of this to 1 and 1. So this is a very small game area, but it's a 10 by 10. And we'll change this to be represented by kind of an icy blue. I think that's kind of a cool color right there. And so now we've got our 2 zones. And when you think about your game loop, you need to get your players into the game. To do that, we're going to be using a teleport. That's a pretty common way to do it. There are other ways to get players into the game, but today we're going to focus on a teleport. So this is going to be called the join game trigger. There we go. And then we can move that to this, we'll call this the join plane, and by right-clicking and copying the position. It's not working. Right-click, copy position. There we go. Then clicking on the trigger, right-click, paste, and now we have that in the right location. If I hit F, I can focus it, and then we can adjust this as needed. Let's go ahead and scale this up. Turn off snapping for a moment. Actually, we'll leave a snap. I like that. It's fine. And we'll change the scale to 2 and 2, and I suppose this one can be 2 as well. There we go. So we've now filled that whole space with our join game trigger. It looks good. Now what we need to do is get them into the game, which the easiest way to do is to use a spawn point. So we're going to go grab a gizmo and a spawn point gizmo. I would say if you want to write down a challenge task to think about later, when you want to add a player without using a trigger and a spawn point to teleport them into the zone, I would say that's a really good, hard task. And as you start seeing the code come together in a minute, please do feel free to try to imagine how you might write that without using a trigger, where the player simply walks into the play area, and if they walk out, it removes them from the game, which we'll actually be showing in a minute. So there will be more to learn there. Now with this spawn point, this is the game spawn point, so I'm going to name it appropriately. And we also need to make sure to turn off world start so the player doesn't start by spawning into this spawn point. Now that we have this set up, I'm noticing the mobile camera is set to follow. That's kind of weird because the default should have been third person. So I'm going to change that to third person. I'm really curious, is this one set to third person? It is. So strange that the spawn point pulled out doesn't have the default. Anyway, now that we've got this set up, we can now set this trigger to teleport players into the game. So we're going to attach a script, and I really appreciate this new trigger script feature. So this is going to create a trigger script, which we'll see momentarily, and this will be called the join game trigger. And then I like to use postfixes like _entity to let me know that this needs to be attached to an entity, which is the trigger. It already has been attached to the trigger, of course. So now that we've got this join game trigger done, we can hit the 3 dots edit script button. Now, editing the script is going to bring up this screen. Let's shrink that down so you can see it all. Perfect. Hot Potato, welcome in. Great to have you. And what we've got in here is a pre-built script, and there's lots that I like and lots that I don't like. For one, I like having an extra space here. For two, we don't need to know on entity enter trigger because we're only tracking players, not other entities. I also like to have my local method with a lowercase p, and it just is a little bit simpler. This is a personal preference, so if you don't want to change this, you don't have to. And then I do like to delete all this default code they have, including the method that we are no longer using. And now I've got this set up just like I need it to be. We used to have to write this all by hand. It was a lot of work. And I do a little bit of beautification, like deleting stuff like that entity up there we're no longer using. Really not required, but it is nice. Now here in props definition, this is where we're going to define the properties we need. And in this case, we need to know about the spawn point that we're teleporting the player to. So we're just going to simply add a game spawn. And then that is curly braces type of prop types dot entity. Add a comma at the very end. You just got to memorize this. It's a lot, but you'll get there. Game spawn, that is all set up. It took me 3 months to get there, so you guys might get there a lot faster than I did. Thankfully, there's these tutorials now. But for me, there wasn't, so it took a lot longer. So anyway, we got game spawn of type props entity. And then when the player enters the trigger, we can teleport them there by typing props, which references the properties panel, dot game spawn, references the spawn point that we're going to reference, dot as, we know it's going to be a spawn point gizmo, so we can reference, or we can cast the type to be of the spawn. Slowing down just a second. So this game spawn is of type entity by default, and then we can say that it is specifically a spawn point gizmo, which is a type of entity. It's like a subclass of entity. And then that gives us extra features on the dot dropdown, including teleport. And now we can teleport the player by just passing in the player parameter from above. There we go. So now we're going to teleport. This question mark means that if we have not referenced it on the properties panel, it just will do nothing. So that's a good reminder to come in here. And now we need to reference the game spawn right here on the trigger. So we'll drag that into here and clear. And now we are starting to see our game come together. Now this part's easy. Y'all should know how to do that. That's pretty easy. The trick that makes this a game loop is when we start thinking about this as a player being actively in the game. And to do that, we're going to create a new script. So we're going to create a new script called, I'm going to call it player data, player underscore data for now. And this player data is going to store information about our players. So 3 dots, open an external editor. So we need to know who is playing. Control A, we can delete everything in here. This data isn't attached to an entity, so it doesn't need a component class. And we can just export the data. We can just simply type export a constant called player underscore data, which will be equal to a bag of stuff or a JSON object. We can then say, what do we want to store in that JSON object? And because it's data, we do typically have to put it above the export. I like to put a lot of space there between it though, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. That's just a personal preference, so it's easier to read. But the data we want to export in this case is a map. And if you've been following along with our Think Like a Programmer series, you might remember the map. And so we type constant player data map equals new map, where the player is the key. We need to make sure to click enter. to import that at the top. And that every player will have a specific amount of data. Now, in this case, we're just going to store the isActive Boolean. And while we could do it like this, I just want to demonstrate that this player data map has a player, has a Boolean. There's just one piece of data. We should really make this data a bag of stuff, another JSON object. That way we can give it a specific name like isActive, and then colon Boolean, Shift-Alt-F to make it pretty. And now if we hover over the player data map, you can see that the map is a player mapped, so the player is mapped to a JSON object that has a property called isActive. So if you'd like to learn more on this, I cannot encourage you enough to check out our video on player data. If you're following along in the playlist, it is the next video in the playlist, or at least that's how I've intended it to be. It is another live stream we did not too long ago. Let's go to content, live streams. And this video is definitely one of the best. It's player data and player stats. It's going to talk a lot more in depth about how you can use this to track so much more. So definitely check that one out. Okay. Whew. Feel free to drop some questions in, but so far, we're saying, let's create a variable called player data map. We're going to create a map, which is a new map. The map takes a key, which the key allows us to set and get data out of this map. And then the value is the second part, which is this JSON object. The parentheses is what actually creates the map. Then we can export it by just simply typing player data map, comma. And now it's inside of this export. So if there's any other data we want to export on the players, we can put that up here too. Now with this setup, we can go back over here, and when the player enters the trigger, we want to say that they are now in the game. And to do that, we'll say player data, clicking enter, adds the import line on top for us, dot player data map, dot set, parentheses, and this is for the player who entered the trigger, and then we need the curly braces. We can then type isActive, colon, true. They have joined the game, they are now active. So Control save, Shift-Alt-F to pretty, and another Control S to save. Fantastic. So now we know the player is active in the game. We're not actually doing anything with this yet. And everything should run the same. So I guess we'll just test it real quick to make sure things are running as intended. And they are. But let's see how we, oh, it looks like the scripts were re-executed. We can do that one more time just to prove it for anyone having lost faith. Don't lose faith, we've got this. But I think it is a good practice to always be testing. It's gonna make sure you have less bugs. Now that we've got this set up, we're going to create a game manager. So we'll go create a new empty object. This is going to represent our game manager. So we'll call it game manager. And we're going to need to create a script for this. So we'll just create a new script, which we'll call game manager underscore entity. There we are. And this game manager is going to do something that I haven't really shown you yet in this series, but it is the way that I write code. Now, number one, we're going to move this to 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. This item is not animated, so we can turn animation off. This isn't necessary. You're welcome to, but it doesn't really matter if you don't change that. But I like to go ahead and set it to none. I should explain why. If you build really complex worlds that are very optimized, an example of this would be Power Wash. In Power Wash, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of animated gunk objects that get placed on the car that then scale down, but they're not animated in such a way that it causes the world to be lagged. And because of that, we want to have as many animated objects in the world. There is a hard limit to the number of animated objects you can have in the world. So if you hit that limit, it just will not let you add another one. So if you have a bunch of these empty objects that are set to animated, it does reduce the maximum count. So if you're having literally hundreds of animated objects, it is worth it to just be in the process of always setting it to off if you do not need to animate it. For reference, the only reason to have it animated is if you're changing the scale or moving it. And for an empty object that's literally holding a script, you don't need it to be animated. So anyway. There's that. Okay, so we've got our game manager set up. And the next thing we're going to do is create a parallel script to this game manager, which is going to be called game manager underscore function. And this is where we're going to do all the stuff that the game manager needs to do. And we also are going to create one more parallel script to the game manager called game manager underscore data. And manager underscore data, perfect. If you were to use some of the Vidyuu utilities, which I believe we talk about you'll see it in some videos at some point. There's a thing called the component utility, and component utility is going to do what our game manager data does, but for the sake of keeping this video fully contained inside of itself, we're going to create it ourselves. We're going to click Open an External Editor. So we've got our game manager data. I'm going to get to explaining it, I'm sorry. If you know what component utility is, you'll start seeing similarities here in just a minute. And you don't necessarily need this game manager data for this purpose if you already have the component utility installed. Only relevant if you know what I'm talking about. All right, we're going to go ahead and click backspace and press Control Save. We're now done with the game manager data for now. We're going to go back over to our little Explorer, double click on Entity, double click on Function, and then Collapse. I like to go Data, then Function, then Entity. That's just how I organize my thoughts up here on the tabs. Functions also do not need a component, so we can backspace that, press Control Save. And Game Manager Entity is the one that actually does get attached and is already attached down here, as you can see. We're going to delete the HZ dots, as you know I like to do. So we get rid of that there and that there. We hit Control period here and click Enter to auto import the explicitly the component from the top. You get the gist. You've been watching these videos, I assume. So now we have our game manager ready to go. So let's start by talking about what we need in data. Maybe we need to talk about why we need it in data. So in game manager function, we want to create a loop. This loop is going to allow us to track what's happening in the game. So we start by typing export constant, just like before. All of my data and function files start like this. And I like to mimic the name of the file, so it goes game manager underscore function. You'll notice we're using camel case because it's a variable. And then curly braces. And then down below it, because functions can be stored down below, and I like to keep my exports at the top if possible, though that's not possible in data files, we can then declare our first function, which is going to be called game loop. And that needs parentheses and curly braces so that it is a function. And then up here we can export the game loop. Now, game loop is going to be called once per second on an interval. And if we go up to game manager entity, we can do that on start. We can simply call game manager function dot game loop. Now that's called it one time on world start. We want to do it using set interval, so we need to call async dot set interval parentheses arrow function curly braces and then comma, and we'll do this once per second. So we get an update once every second. And then this code goes inside of the curly braces. Control B, Shift Alt F, pretty. All right, there we go. So now that we have this set up, this interval is going to happen once per second. But this .async is only available inside of the class or a component. So in Horizon, async is not globally accessible. What this means is in our game loop, there's no way to access async, at least in the way that we use set timeout and set interval. And so to use it, we need to set it up in our game manager data. And I've got a way of doing that. So let's copy this right here because this code is practically the same. We can then change this to be data, and then we can delete game loop. And then we do need to create what this data is. And this is so hacky, but basically what you want to do is get access to a component's, to all the features of a component without being inside of a component. And so what I type is constant, or no, this isn't a constant, it's a let, because it needs to be changed on world start. So we say let component be of type Horizon component or undefined. So it starts as undefined. So by not defining it here and just putting a semicolon, now you could write equals undefined, but the shorthand is just to not write it at all and just leave it like that. So component starts as undefined, and then when we export it right here, we can now define it on the game manager right here. And so we can say, let's do this at the very beginning, right before the set interval. And so we call game manager data dot component, which equals this. And so we've now given access to our game manager function to call this game manager data and receive this. And this gives you access to async and a bunch of other things that are stored inside of the component class. So it's a little hacky, but it definitely works, and you'll see me use it a lot of places. And this just makes it so you don't have to write all your code inside of the class, which just leads to better code organization, and it frees you from the Horizon system in some ways. So if you ever wanted to copy paste your code somewhere else, more of your code is copy pastable. Okay, so next we have our game loop. And in our game loop, I just want to quickly demonstrate this. If we call game manager data dot component dot async, you'll get the question mark, meaning this line of code will not run if we forgot to reference component on world start, but we took care of it, so it's good. And then parentheses, oh wait, we need to do dot set timeout, parentheses, parentheses, arrow function, curly braces, comma. We'll do a 250 millisecond delay. And then what we can type here is console.log date.now, just to prove that this stuff is working. And so we're going to log the current time. If I copy paste this, Control C, and we do this right here, we're going to get two different date.nows, one that is 250 milliseconds later, and so on. So you'll be able to see that that async is working. All right, so with that code all set up, I know we went a little bit faster there, but there's still quite a bit to go through. So just kind of rolling. We'll hit world simulation on, and now we should momentarily see, there we go. We've got a few of these have hit the console. So we can see the first one happened at the time of 5616. This one also shows 5616. Oh, because it's not showing us the whole number. Is it? Why are these times the same? I did something wrong and I don't know what. Let's find out why. Date.now returns the milliseconds that have elapsed. Yep, that's all right. I think it's because the number is probably too large and we're getting a rounding issue. And I probably need to type .toString at the end of it. That's my guess. So I think we're just getting a rounding issue inside of the console log. Just a guess, not sure. Okay, give that a second to compile. All right, world simulation on. We'll get the first two. And look at, there we go. There we go. The numbers are more accurate now. And you can see it goes 596 and then 250 milliseconds later at 862. And it's roughly 250, or it was 300 milliseconds. What was it? I don't remember the exact amount of time that we were delaying, but you can see the delay. It was 250 milliseconds. It doesn't look like it's exact. It's as close as it can get. It's very close to 250, but it's a little over. So it's probably like waiting 250 and then going when its next available frame is or something like that. But anyway, you can see it worked. So that is async inside of a function file. Pretty neat. Okay, and if you don't find that neat, it's okay. One day you might find that cool too. Anyway, so we've got that all going well for us, but let's see what else we can do with this game loop. So our game manager needs to track the game's time, so how much time has elapsed, but we also know that the player is active and we haven't done anything with that. So let's go into our game manager and let's find out how many players are active. So let's create at the start of the game loop, we want to find out how many players are active. So I'm going to create a separate function called get active players, player count. We'll use players. Let's get all of the active players. There's a really easy way to do that. There really is. But I'm not super familiar with it, so we're going to do it the long-handed way. We're going to do it long-handed. There's an easier way to do this, but it's more advanced, and I just haven't practiced it enough. So GetActivePlayers is a function, so we need parentheses. And what it's going to do is return an array of players. So a player square bracket array, and then curly braces. Now to create this, inside of the function, we say constant players is of type player array, and it equals an empty array. And then we can go to the player data file and say player data.playerData map dot for each player in the player data map. We receive the value, which is the player data, and that is also received with the player as the second value. So arrow function curly braces. And so I always write arrow function curly braces really quickly because otherwise you get those red underlines. But you can hover over it to see that this is the player data is active, and this is the player. Now we're going to add a semicolon at the end because I like semicolons, and press enter. We can then say players, well actually Control Z. We need to check if the player is active. So we say if parentheses player data dot is active. So we're checking if they are active. Then we can say players dot push parentheses player. And so just to quickly recap what we're doing here, we have an array of players defined here. We go into the player data map, and for each player data, there's a player, because it's a map, has a player mapped to the data. And then if that player data is active, so we have an active player in the game, we then go to our players that we created up here, and we push the player into it. And then here at the bottom, we type return players, and that will return the array. So up here inside of our game loop, we can write one clean line that says constant active players equals get active players. And now we can hover over active players to see that it's an array of players. This is fantastic because our code is so much more readable, and if we need to get into this code here, if we need to investigate it, we just click on this, go back down here, and investigate the code. But up here it's just one line. So then, now that we've got that set up, we can now say if parentheses the active players dot length is greater than, let's say, 2, so there's got to be at least 2 players for this game to be active, then we can increment the current time. So let's write a comment. We want to increment current time. I'll say increment current time. And we also need to check if game time is over or if not enough active players. And so what we could do in the else is say else, because we know that this is only happening if there are more than 2 active players, so the game is playable. And then in the else, we know that there aren't enough active players, so we can say if the game was active, end the game early. Okay, so we've got these 2 conditions that we're going to be checking, which means we need more data. We need a lot more data, and that's where we have our game manager data file. And so in here, we can create some more values, and I'm pretty sure this works. I'm not sure if I agree with doing it this way, but we're going to. So we're going to say game time equals or colon 0, comma. And if we hover over game time, we can see it's of type number. So we didn't have to define it up here. I'm kind of wondering, I don't think we should do that on this one. I always do it this way. We could try changing it, but I'm not sure it'll work. Component colon is of type component or undefined. I think this gets upset. Yeah, this is upset because the colon is how you define the value. That's why. So colon defines the value, not the type of the value. And there is a way to declare the type, but we're just not going to get into that. So this is the best way if you have something of a specific type to declare, and then put it down here as a comma separated value. All right, so game time is 0, and we also needed to know, I think that's it for now. If game was active, because game time equaling 0 means the game is inactive, right? So we know if game time is 0, the game is inactive. And so down here, we want to increment the current time. So we go into the game manager data dot game time and say plus plus. So now the time has gone up. And then right here, we could say if parentheses game manager data dot game time is greater than, let's say it's a 3-minute game, 180 milliseconds. It's a good time for a game. Then we want to end game if it's over 3 minutes. Now, this number is a magic number, probably should be stored somewhere. Hey, welcome in, see me, bro. Great to have you. I see you. Check if game time is over or if not enough active players. So we need to check if not enough active players, which is actually happening down below. And so we can see down here, if the game was active, we need to end the game early. So we can say if parentheses game manager data dot game time is greater than 0, meaning the game was active, we need to end game early. So that's going to be slightly different than ending the game. Pretty straightforward. For the sake of making this, as a video, let's change the game time to be 18 seconds, and then just leave a comment here and say //180 recommended, i.e. /3-minute game length. Okay, there we go. Welcome in, Danny. Great to have you. All right, so we've got this set up, and we do need to end the game. We're not ready to end the game yet, but we'll get there. Ending the game early. I'm just kind of rolling through this in my brain to make sure that we have everything. And I think we do. Okay, so let's create a method here at the bottom to end the game. So we're going to say function called endGame, parentheses, curly braces, and then right here we just simply call endGame, and right here we can call endGame as well. Game, parentheses. And what do we need to do in the end game? Well, we need to take the game manager data and reset the game time back to 0. Game time needs to equal 0. And we need to go into the players, the player data, and say for the player data map, dot for each player. And remember how we do this by typing for each parentheses, and then inside this parentheses, we need to have the player data. And after player data, we have the player that represents that data. We then arrow function to the right, curly braces, I add a semicolon, press enter. And now inside these curly braces, we can say if, parentheses, player data dot is active, so we have an active player, then what we want to do is TP the player. And we need to say player data dot is active equals false. So we say they're no longer an active player, so that way the game time stops counting. I think so we can see stuff happening, we're going to do a console log right here whenever we change the game time. And maybe we'll actually put it right here before this so we can always see. So console.log, parentheses, game manager data dot game time. That way we have that on the console. Okay, player data dot is active equals false. And we do need to teleport the player. We don't currently have a reference to the world spawn point or like the lobby spawn point. So I do want to create that. Let's head back here into Horizon and create a lobby spawn point. So we're going to duplicate the world spawn point and slide it back. This one is going to represent the world spawn point. And it's good because it says spawn on start. This one will represent the lobby spawn point, so I'll make sure to rename it lobby. And the reason you want to differentiate that is when a player loads into the game, you kind of want to give them a little bit of distance to walk so that they can, warm up into the world so they don't interrupt the experience. Whereas if you spawn someone into the lobby, they've just been playing, they don't want to have to walk a long distance, they just want to get back into it. So having these separate spawn points is really important. And so for our lobby spawn point, what we want to do is make sure it's referenced on our game manager, which means we need to go and add a property for that. So we're going to our game manager entity, we'll add a property called lobby spawn, curly braces, type, prop types dot entity, comma at the end. And then under Game Manager Data, we're going to duplicate this line, Control-C, Control-V, and we're going to create one called Lobby Spawn, and then that will be of type spawn point gizmo or undefined. We can then add that here, lobby spawn, comma, Control Save. And then on the Game Manager entity, we can set that on world start by going Game Manager Data, just like before, lobby spawn equals props dot lobby spawn. Notice as I click enter, it adds this dot for me, so I don't have to type that. It's really nice. Now you'll notice that this is upset because we need to type it into a spawn point gizmo. So we type dot as parentheses spawn point gizmo. And what's nice is we never have to type that again because we've casted it on world start. And one thing you might notice here is this question mark returns undefined if the lobby spawn is undefined. And therefore that is compatible with the fact that this lobby spawn can be a spawn point gizmo or undefined. That's why this doesn't throw any errors. So if you don't reference this on the properties panel, you're not going to get an error, but things will not function as intended. So let's make sure to reference that right away. So we're going to select our game manager, and now we go down here and drag our lobby spawn point down into there. Perfect. And maybe we'll rename this one world spawn point, so when we see it, we know what it is, world spawn. Perfect. Okay, so now that that has been set up, if we go back into our code, there's two more things we need to do. We need to go into our game manager function and teleport the player. So we say game manager data dot lobby spawn dot teleport and parentheses player. And what's nice is it adds this question mark for you, so it doesn't run this line of code if it's not referenced. It's just pretty easy to use. So like that. I think that's actually it. So this is going to teleport the player out of the game when the game is over. So when the 18 seconds is up, we're going to be teleporting them back to the lobby spawn point. So we'll clear this, wait for that to compile. One more second, you can see it's blue still up here, and then there's the last code, clear. World simulation is on. We can see the timer is set to 0, so game time is at 0. We jump into preview mode, and there is something you might have caught, which is that the game requires 2 players, and I am just a singular player. So even though I can run around this space, the game does not start for me because we currently require 2 players. So what we're going to do for testing purposes is go to our gizmos and pull out an NPC gizmo. We're going to place this gizmo above this trigger. So we're going to right-click, copy position, right-click, paste position, and then slide it up so that when this NPC spawns in, they teleport over and into the game, and that should work. So we'll call this our opponent or other player, and we'll put parentheses NPC. Just naming is nice so that way everything reads clearly on the hierarchy. And then we'll call this other player. Perfect. Okay, so now that that's set up, we can go world simulation off, clear, world simulation on, play, and now when we jump in, we can see there's already a player in the game. The time is still at 0. We jump into the game. Now there's 2 players in here, and the time is not going up. That is, oh, what? If I had to take a guess, it's something about the way that the NPC engages with the map. World simulation off, clear. Let's check our code and see if there's an error. Oh, we said greater than 2, which means it actually needed 3. We changed that to greater than 1, or what's more readable, Control-Z, is greater than or equal to 2. That's way more readable. So we know that we want it to be 2 or greater. That was the problem. Okay, cool. Okay, we're doing good. Let's go ahead and world simulation on, clear, preview. First, the NPC is in. We jump in. The timer should start counting up. There it goes. 1, 2, and it's going to go to 18. When it hits 18, it's going to teleport both of us back, and we're almost there. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Game's over, and we get teleported to the lobby. And you can see the timer is back to 0 on the console, and we're both teleported to the lobby spawn point. Now, unfortunately, I can't get this NPC to walk into the game. That's okay. We should just restart the world, but you can see that is basically a loop. So I'm going to take a quick second there to just breathe. So Hello. Great to have you guys. I see that everyone's joined in. Feel free to use the chat to ask questions. It's getting a little toasty in here, so I'm going to open up my room to the AC'd air outside. There we go. Hopefully that'll cool it off. Let's look at my notes here on what we were going to cover. So we've teleported into the game. Done. We've looked at a function file. And so the function file just makes your code more readable. I find it's way easier to have function files. They also allow you to communicate with other function files. So if you wanted to create something like a position tracking script, you could put that in its own function file and call it from the game manager. That's something I think you might find in the player data video. That's what I'd like you guys to go and check out after this. This is kind of queuing up for a much harder topic, which is player data and player stats. And if we don't cover position tracking in that video, somebody let me know so we can talk about it, because yeah, that's a pretty good topic. All right, so we've talked about function. We've seen how data files can store all sorts of data and make it accessible everywhere. You do need to be cautious with that everywhere feature, because like one of the more hacky things we've done is create a game manager data file that theoretically anyone else can access in any other script. You shouldn't do that, right? Like try to keep your game manager accessing its stuff, and like because it's in charge, nobody else should really be touching it. I like to think of my code being like a river. So like there's a flow to how everything runs. So game manager can talk to other managers, but like those managers don't talk upstream. They can talk downstream to like sub managers. What you're trying to prevent is a circular dependency, which is where you have one talk to another that talks to another that talks back up to somebody. That is not okay in TypeScript. It can create some weird issues. It's a topic we might have talked about at some point in a video, but don't have time to talk about it now. But anyway, avoid circular dependencies and try to keep flow to your code. We did mention utility files. I'm not going to really talk about this one today. There's a bunch of utilities that we've made. They're in the description in the Google Drive. There's one really important one that myself, and I just discovered this yesterday. I was trying to record a tutorial, and the tutorial completely flopped because I found when I pulled out the overtime utility that I posted in the public asset library, it caused a weird bug that broke the world. And I had this with one of my interns as well. So like we're having some issue. It's a Horizon bug for sure, because you can't create the correct file that's missing. The file is there, it's just not there, which is all sorts of weird. So in that utilities, if you go down to the description, in the Google Drive, there's a utilities folder that has the overtime scripts. So you can just go ahead and use those. I'm just making sure that you attach the overtime entity to an invisible empty object like we did for our manager here. Okie doke. So other things we need to talk about. We've got a game loop. We're tracking the active players. We're tracking the current time. What we haven't done is eliminate a player so that the game resets early. Let's do that. That would be great. So we've got it where it loops when the timer's up, but we haven't done it where when the player is inactive. I'm checking the chat real quick. Danny says, do you know how to create a button that displays the grab symbol? Yes. Let me come back to that in a little bit, Danny. Let me keep my train of thought for just a little longer, and then we'll take a look at that. All right, so what we want to do is inside of our game manager, we have this end game we're trying to reach, which is when there are, where is it? If game time is greater than 0, but the players are less than 2, then we know there's only one player left and we want to end the game. So we need to have a player leave the game. And this is where I was talking about a position tracker. So let's actually do this. We're going to create a new script, which is going to be called position tracking underscore function. And what this is going to do is track to see if players are within the game area. And if they are not within the game area, we're going to remove them from the game. So if they walk outside of the space, people have been able to glitch through walls. So there's no way to fully enclose somebody and make sure they're enclosed. So it's best to be able to be like, you're not inside the game space, let's get you out. Now there's a lot of ways to track position. We're going to assume that your game area is so far away that a sphere would surround it roughly. So your viewing area wouldn't intersect that sphere. So like the lobby right here is the viewing area. And then we're going to draw a sphere around this. Now we know that this is a 10 by 10 plane. It's currently set to a scale of 1, which means that it is 5 meters in radius. This is about 7 meters to the corner. So we're going to draw a sphere with a radius of 7 around this to track if players are within the radius. And it's just a bunch of math. You'll see in a moment how it works. But we can actually test this using a shape, a sphere, pulling that out. We can then copy the position of our plane, go to our sphere, right click and paste. And if we change this scale to be a scale of 10, well, actually we wanted to go to 7 as our radius, which would be 14. So go to 14, 14, 14. This is the area. You can see it's actually missing it. Let's try 15. 15, 15, 15. There we go. So this sphere completely encompasses that area. And so if you're within this sphere, you're considered in the game by our code. And I'm going to show you how we're going to create that in code. So a radius of 7.5. The radius is 7.5. 15 is the diameter. Okay. So let's go into the game manager function. We're going to go and open up the new position tracking function. Control A, delete all of this. Export constant position tracking underscore func equals curly braces. Create a new function down here. Function called track players in sphere. Let's call this, well, we're going to change this a little bit. The name isn't accurate. So what it's going to do is eliminate players outside of radius. So that is a better name. Eliminate, which is to say we're not eliminating them, we're setting their active status. So actually, yeah, we're going to go with eliminate. Eliminate players outside of radius. Sure, why not? Outside of radius. And then what we'll do is say we have a position, so a center position. Center position will be a vector 3. And the radius, which is a radius in meters, which is a number. And now that we have that, we can now go through all the players and then change their is active status. All right, so let's add this to our exports. Eliminate players outside of radius. Now this doesn't actually do anything, so we need to come back. I like to use red dots on the side to remind me that I need to finish this code. Now in the game manager function, we can then update the active players before we get the active players. So before we get this list of active players, let's eliminate anybody who's outside. So we'll call position tracking function dot eliminate players outside of radius. We need to pass in some values that we don't have yet, but we do want to do this in this order, right? So we eliminate players, then we get the current active players. Then to get the radius, the game manager entity will need to have another property. So we'll hit Control C, Control V, and this will represent the center entity, which is a prop types entity. And we could create a radius. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to have this center entity, which will allow us to move the center around relatively easily. We can then go to our game manager data, duplicate this one, Control C, Control V, and instead of it being a spawn point gizmo, we're going to set this, actually, we're going to change this entirely. We're going to do it the same way we did game time, and we'll call this game center is vec3.0. So it starts as a zeroed out vector, but we can modify this, and we can do that by going into the game manager entity on world start. Just like we were setting these two, we can add one right here for game manager data, dot game center, and we'll say equals, and then we go to props dot center entity dot position dot get. And now you're going to notice there's an error because this can't be undefined, but this question mark returns undefined. Now I have a trick for this. It's question mark, vec3.0, it's just so much quicker. And so if this is undefined, it returns vec3.0. Theoretically, this is never undefined, right? Like we're going to go set this right now. So let's change this and call this the game center. And then going to our game manager, we can now drag the game center into the pill reference slot. There we go. So now we've referenced the game center. You'll notice that that might have turned this to animated. Yep. And we can turn animated off, which gives it better lighting. So just be careful when you're moving mesh entities and you might accidentally set it to animated. You would want to turn that off as you get much better lighting when it's not animated. Okay, so in the code, we now have the center entity referenced. We've now got that set up inside of our game manager data. Go ahead, close out of this. Inside of our game manager function, we need to pass in that value, which we don't actually need to pass in though, do we? Because as it turns out, it's now in, whoa, wait, we do, because position tracking function is downstream and we don't want it reaching upstream to the game manager data file. So we do need to pass it in. Game manager data dot game center, and then we'll use a radius of 7.5 like we've already discussed. All right. And now that we've got that set up, we'll go ahead and hit Control Save. Let's see. That's pretty good. So now let's go to eliminate players outside of radius. This now needs to actually do something. So we go into the player data file, dot player data map, dot for each, just like we've gotten pretty used to at this point. We're going to pass in player data, and then the player, and then arrow function, curly braces, semicolon, because I like semicolons. And right here we can say if parentheses player data dot is active. So only if they're active do we need to do all this crazy math on them. So if we have an active player, we can then say if parentheses if player data dot is active. Now we need to check the distance of the player's position to the center position. And the easiest way to do that is to type center position dot distance and then parentheses, and you can see that it takes another vector and it gets the distance in meters between those two vectors. So then we type in player dot position dot get. Now that's going to get the position of the player, and if that value, so we go out to the right one, is greater than the radius in meters, we know that they are outside of our area. And in that case, we need to say player data dot is active equals false. Control save. All right, so now we will have eliminated the player if they walk outside of our area. And there's other ways to eliminate players too, right? Like you could do when player gets shot by a gun, we could update the player data in the map to be not active anymore, and so on and so forth. So let's give this a swirl. World simulation on, clear, play, walking in, and we are in the game now, so the game timer is going up. Should be going up. Reset the world. There's something wrong in the code. Maybe he's outside of the radius. Somehow I might have calculated it wrong. It's possible. Let's try that again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think what's happening here, we could do a bunch of console logs to figure it out, but I've got a pretty good guess. And I think when we teleport the player, we've set the is active state too early, because it takes them more than 1 second to teleport in, and because it does take time to actually teleport a player, but we are setting them active as soon as they teleport. So on the join game trigger, here it is. So we said they were active immediately. What we should actually do is say async dot set timeout. This would have been really hard to discover on your own. I'm so sorry. But like sometimes you just have to build some intuition, and this is like, oh yeah, right, the teleporting takes time. Unfortunately, this is just years of struggling and pain that have built up this intuition. So we're gonna add a 1100 millisecond delay. That should be more than enough. It's 1 second extra long, so that it waits at least until the next, it's 1/10 of a second long, so it waits until at least the next loop of the game manager, and then we move this up and into here. Yeah, so then we call that in the set timeout after 1.1 seconds. Pretty confident that's going to do the trick. If I'm wrong, we'll have to use console logs to diagnose it further. World simulation on, hit play, and then we'll run in. Now we're in, and that should be counting up. There it is. All right, so now we're counting up, and what I can do is walk out of this, and now our NPC gets teleported because we're already out of the game. And I think that's where we might want to use our elimination to say if you get knocked out, teleport to the lobby. So let's go to our join game, or where were we doing that? We were in the position tracking function. So in addition to setting there is active to false, we should also like teleport the player out to the lobby. But that's stored in the game manager data, and we really shouldn't be talking upstream. Welcome in, Fear the Illusion. Great to have you. Good afternoon indeed. So it'd be like teleport player. In this case, what I'd recommend doing is creating, like I know it's totally okay, but let's create a special teleport. We'll call this spawn point underscore data. So we're gonna create another data file to store the spawn point in. 3 dots. Open an external editor, and what you're going to start seeing is that there's just a lot of things that interconnect, and that's kind of what creates a game loop. There's just a lot of interconnected parts, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the flow of my data so that there isn't circular dependencies and such. So we say constant spawn point underscore data equals curly braces. We can then go to our game manager data, control X this one out of here, control V it over here, add some extra space, make sure to control period enter to add the import line. Coming up here, we can control X to delete that here. I like to make this look pretty, so I just delete that. Not required. Control S to save, and then up here, control V. Oh, wrong one. Oopsie. Go to this one, control V. Now we've got our lobby spawn exported inside of spawn point data. We need to make sure to type export so that that is exported. There we go. So now our spawn point data has been exported. Now we have an issue in our game manager function because it's accessing that spawn point data. So we need to change this to be spawn point data. Now it's happy. Control save. Go to position tracking, or no, it's the game manager entity. Also reference this lobby spawn. So we need to update that as well to be the spawn point data file. Totally okay to have the game manager entity setting up some other data files. So there we go. And now we can teleport the player by calling spawn point data dot lobby spawn dot teleport parentheses player. Okay, so when the player walks out of the area, they'll get teleported as well. All right, we should test that, and then let's review our notes and see what else we are looking to accomplish. We are pretty much to time, though, as I was trying to keep this under an hour. And I do feel like we've covered most of the basics, so we'll see what else there is to cover. Preview world. Oh, we have an issue. This guy spawned in the wrong spot. We'll hit reset world. There we go. Clear. Jump into preview mode. There we go. And now we're in. And if we walk out, we get teleported back to the lobby with all the other players. Nice. Cool beans. Switching back over to camera view, let's take a look at our to-do list and see how we're doing. So we are now tracking the active players. We've learned how to eliminate a player and then teleport them back. We have used the active player map. I recommend checking out the player data video after this so that you can learn more about storing a lot more player data. So instead of just checking there is active, you could check a whole bunch of other stuff, like how many deaths have they had and things like that. That's what player data is going to allow you to do, just track a lot more information. What we haven't done is assigning a player to be it. So I'd like 1/5 of players to be it. So what we need to do is know when the game is started, we need to assign players a role. And that's where we're going to wrap today's call. So Danny, I know you asked a question. The grab symbol, it's on the properties panel. Just very quickly, if you have a grabbable, let's say we pull out a cube. This will just take 2 seconds. Shapes, we'll pull out a shape. and then you go and change it to motion interactive, you're going to see that there is an option down here to change the icons. So this is like your index trigger icon. What do you want that to look like? I don't see an option for grab icon. There's avatar pose that you can set. Honestly, just play with this. There is some ways to change the icons using local scripting. Play around with this some, and then in the description there's a link to our Discord. Check out the Discord, see, and you can ask questions there using the scripting general channel, Typescript channel. So love for you to bring that question there if you're still having some issues. Okay. Whew, without further ado, let's assign a role to a player. And to make this visual, I wanted to attach something to the player's face, but unfortunately I don't think we have time for that. So instead, we're going to do something a little simpler. And unfortunately, doing player attachables will have to be saved for another day. Okay, let's get back Horizon. And think. We've got this set up where we have the game manager function, and we know that this is starting here. So link for the Discord is in the description, Danny. Just take a look in the description of this video. You should see it. Let me know if you don't. Eliminate players outside of radius. So we start by eliminating players. We then get the current active players. We were then console logging the game time just so we know what's happening in the game. If the length is greater than 2, we're incrementing the game time. There is one scenario here, though. If we said if, parentheses, game manager data. Yeah, no problem. Glad you got that. Thank you. Game manager data dot game time triple equals 0. We know that this is the first time in the game that this active players was greater than or equal to 2, which means we can assign a role here. And for a 2-player game, you need 1 person on each team. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. In this case, we want to do assign role based on 1/5 being it and 1 of each required. Okay? So what we're going to do then is, and I like this. This is how I do it in Murder Manor. And what this allows for is no matter what, you are always rolling a 1/5 die to be it. So it doesn't like stack the odds against you. It pretty much guarantees you're always going to have this 1/5 chance unless you're playing in a lower setting, like with less players, in which case you have a higher chance. And what we'll do, oh, this is difficult because if there's only 2 players, we got to roll the dice slightly differently. Okay, so I'm kind of just frustrated because we have to choose a random player, and I don't have my utility. We were supposed to talk about utilities, so let's pull out a utility real quick. In the description, there's a link to our Google Drive, and in our Google Drive, you're going to find, I'm going to close out of these right now, the utilities section right here. And inside of utilities, we have an array utility script, which is right at the top. Here it is, array functions. And we can download that, and let's save that somewhere easy to get to, like the desktop. And I want to name it clean. There we go. All right, so we got this array function. I've opened that up in a folder, and then we're going to close out of this. So now we have this array function. Inside of VS Code, right-clicking, you can click Reveal in File Explorer to open up this window, and then I can drag the array function into the scripts for the world. And now we have this utility, and this utility gives us quite a few things like shuffling an array, removing items from an array, getting a random item from an array is the one that we wanted, but there's quite a few utilities in here that are nice. And if we go back into our game manager function, we have an array of players, our active player array, and we need 1 player to be it for sure. And so we're going to say constant the it player equals, and then we call array utilities dot get random item from array, parentheses, and now we just need to pass in the active players. There we go. So now we have the it player, and with that it player, we kind of need to know the roles to or the players to assign roles to. So let's create a new array. So it's going to be called constant without role. So we have a without role players, which is going to be equal to a brand new array, so square brackets, and then dot, 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 active players, semicolon. And I just want to take a quick second to talk about this because I feel like we need intuition on arrays. So an array is this thing that it's a bunch of items in an array, right? Like you have 3 players, let's imagine, or 2 players. And I like to think about it as like a space on the shelf. So if you just say, you create a new one, and then you just say it equals this, you're not actually saying it. Let's see what that looks like in code. So if we duplicate this line, Control-C, Control-V, and instead of having square brackets around it, we say without role players equals active players, then it is exactly the same shelf. You're talking about the exact same shelf of players. So when you start messing with those players on that shelf, you've messed with those players. Don't do that. And so without role players needs to be a brand new array. So by putting square brackets there, we're saying this is a brand new shelf. And then the 3 dots spreads the original array out. So 3 dots is the spread operator. And so it's saying take the items inside of the active players and just spread them out, which adds them to the array, more or less. So we've got a brand new array made from the active players array. We can then use without role players to determine who is our first it player. And then we can use array utilities dot remove item from array, and then pass in the array without role players, and then pass in the it player. And now we've removed that player from the array of players. Because this is like, imagine at some point you add a queue countdown timer or something. Your amount of players inside the game might be greater than 2. So we're going to then say the second player, our constant not it player, is going to also equal array utilities because we need one of each. We guaranteed need one of each role so that the game is playable. So the not it player equals array utilities dot get random item from array. And then once again, we need to remove that player. So Control-C, Control-V, Alt arrow down, and then change copy, double click, Control-C, double click, Control-V. And so now we've removed the not it player from the without role players. Okay, so we've got our first 2, but there's still potentially players without roles. And those players need to be determined. And we do that by saying the without role players dot for each, and then parenthesis, parenthesis, there's a player, and for that player we run an arrow function, curly braces, and then we can assign role, okay? And assign role at 1/5, 1/5 are it. All right, so this is how we can do role assignment when the world starts. This is also a ton of code, so we should create a utility function. So I'm going to put a dot here to remind me to create a utility function, like on both ends. But what we need to do first is exactly that. Fear, you just predicted what I was going to say. Using the player data map. Remember, we have the isActive Boolean. Now we need to know what their role is. So we're going to say comma role, which is a string. And so we're going to put their role in here as a string and press save. Now you could change it to be role as a Boolean, like is it, but you might have more than one role. So let's use a string so that you can have more than just 2, like it or not it. And that would allow you to do more in the future. It does make coding it a little bit harder. So it's kind of a debate there. But what we also will need then is a definition for what the roles are. And you might remember this from some of our earlier videos. So we're going to create a new script, which is going to be called, and we'll figure out what that error is in a minute, which is going to be called player_defs. And this is where we're going to define what the role is. So if we go into our player definitions, that's what this file is for, Control A, we can define the role. So we're going to call this a player role. We need to say that this is a type, so we say type player role. You'll notice I'm using Pascal case because it's a type. And then player role is going to be equal to a few different options. And so we're going to be calling one option it and one option not it. But you could imagine adding more options like other, and then semicolon at the end, Shift Alt F. So now we have our 3 player roles, press Control Save, and we do want to export this type, so we'll type export type, so that way it's available across all of our scripts, and we can use that to make our game, we can use it all over our game really. But we're going to close out of this, and in here, instead of saying the role is of type string, we can now say the role is of type player role. There it is, and then click enter, and if we hover over player role, it shows us that these are the 3 options for player role. Okay, press Control Save, and now if we go back into our game manager function, we do need to give these player a role inside of their player data. That is the bit that's a little bit difficult. So I think we're going to create a utility function down here at the bottom, and we're going to create 2 utility functions. So first function is going to be the one that is assign roles. And really this is like when the game starts. So this is like game started. And so this is what do we do when the game is started. And then below the game started, we need a function for assigning roles, assign roles. And then below that, we need a function for set role in player map, player data map. All right, so these are the 3 functions we need to set up, and it starts with this. Right here, we know that game time triple equaling 0 means the game has just started, so all of this can get moved into the method or the function called game started. So we call game started right here. This makes our code more readable, and if we need to change anything in the game started function, we just double click, scroll down until we find it, and then here it is, which is where I'm going to paste all of that code. Shift Alt F to reformat. And we can see that we're missing active players. So it looks like we need game started needs to receive the active players. So we say active players is a player array. And up here, we'll need to pass that player array in to game started. So we'll pass in active players. Okay. And now that we have this, we can see that really what game started is doing is it's assigning roles. There might be more things you need to do when the game started, but for now we're just assigning roles. So we'll hit Control X, call assign roles, parentheses, square brackets, and then paste assign roles here into paste into assign roles, which also needs active players. So once again, we're going to copy this, Control C, and paste that into assign roles. We can then pass in active players into this function. And then lastly, we need to set role in player data map, which means we need to know the player that we're setting for, which is of type player, and we need to know the role, which is a player role. Player role, there we go. And so right here, after we remove the item from the player from the array, we can then say set player role in data map, parentheses, passing in the it player, and passing in the player role, which is a string. So we type single ticks, and then you get the 3 options. So this is the person who is it, and that should have been happy. Oh, it's not happy because this could be undefined. So it's easiest if we just type or undefined, and we'll handle that in a minute. All right, so then we can duplicate this, Control C, Control V, move that down here, and so now we need to set the not it player to be, and if I just backspace this in single ticks again, I can arrow down to not it, and there we go. So now we have set up the it player and the not it player, and we haven't set up this function yet, but we will in a minute. So I like to use functions to describe what I want to do, and then like red dot, I'll fix that in a moment. And then right here, the players without roles are about to be assigned a role. And what we're going to do is use an if statement. We say if, parentheses, math.random, parentheses, and if that is greater than 0.8, meaning they have rolled the lucky number, so a 20% chance, then they are going to get the it role. And I'm realizing there's an easier way to write this, so I'm actually going to rewrite this somewhat differently. So to do this, to make this one line of code, we then write set role and player data map, because there's only two options here. We could have done an if-else statement, but we can also just do a shorthand, which is set role and player map for the player. And the role is based on the math.random. So we can do parentheses, and then we'll copy our if statement here, Control-C, and then paste. And then what we do is use the question mark, which allows us to say, if that's true, then we want to return the it value, and then else, using colon, we want to return not it. So if they're greater than 0.8, they're it, otherwise they're not it. So it's just a single line of code, so much easier. I've only started using that in like the last 6 months, but it is so nice to have this instead of an if-else statement. So definitely encourage learning this method and getting comfortable seeing it around. It's really nice. Okay, wrapping up, we're almost done. We now need to set the role in the player data map. And so when we set the role in the player data map, this is where we're kind of assigning players roles. This is also where we could potentially change what that role means. So I'm going to say update map, and then we also need to update player, we'll call this like status. We'll call it effects, okay? So the update map means we need to get the player data. So we say constant player data equals player data dot player data map dot get, and now we can get the player from the player data map. You'll notice that player is undefined, so we actually need to put in a big old blanket if parentheses player is defined, then we do stuff. Alt arrow up. So if player is defined, then we're going to do stuff. If they're not defined, something's gone wrong in our code. That should never happen, so I'm not worried about it. Okay. Player data equals player data dot player data map dot get player. And now that we have the player data, we can then say player data dot role equals player role. And sorry, that's lowercase player role. Oh, we just called it role. Got it. There we go. It's like, what did I call that? You'll notice that player data could be undefined if the player is not in the map for some reason. So we should verify player data by saying if player data, curly braces, and then alt arrow up. Nice. And we can remove the question mark. And then we just need to update the effects for the player. And I think we should only do that if we are actually updating the player data map role. So we'll put that inside of here. We can remove this updating map. I do like to create some space between this so it's easier to read, so I'll add some space there. And then the player effects is going to be really simple. We're just going to say player dot avatar scale dot set to be 2, and we only want to do that if they are it. So what we can use is a case switch. I'm not super familiar with these. I don't use these very often. I'm actually just going to use an if statement because I find it's easier. So we'll say if role triple equals single ticks it, curly braces, and then alt, oops, Control Z. So we'll click here, and then alt arrow down. So if they're it, we update their avatar scale to be 2, else, curly braces, we'll update their scale to be 1, so just normal. And so yeah, you're either it and you get a scale or not. And then we also need to now, when we are saying respawn the player back to the beginning, we need to change their scale back to 1 if they leave the area. And that is we're getting so deep into the coding. You should never write this much code without testing. There's also there's an area here I need to fix. We'll fix that later. But just because I'm now well over time, unfortunately, we're just going to very, very quickly add a note here, which is how do you make a utility for like teleporting? So we're just going to create a teleport function file, which I feel like we have with spawn point underscore data. So let's create Control A spawn point underscore function. So this will be related to the spawn point data file. And if we go to 3 dots, open external editor, our spawn point function is going to handle whenever we need to respawn the player to the world spawn point. So we can type export constant spawn point underscore function equals curly braces, and then we can create a function called respawn player, which would be like teleport to lobby. So we'll call it teleport player to lobby, which will need to know the player, and then curly braces. And that is, of course, of type player. There we go. We can then export that here, and comma. And I'm so sorry we're going fast. You might have to come back and review this. That's a-okay. So when the teleport player to lobby comes in, we're going to do all that stuff. But there's a few places where we need to call this teleport player to lobby. And you'll remember it's right here. And this is the code, so we'll hit Control X. That's what it's currently doing. Control V. Shift Alt F to make that pretty. Shift Alt F. There we go. And then we need to import this, so Control period, Enter. That adds our import from spawn point data. And now we're teleporting the player. We can then, right here, replace that with spawn point function dot teleport player to lobby, passing in the player parameter. And so just a reminder, the reason we're doing this is because we need to do two things every time we teleport the player to lobby. And one of those is to teleport them. And the second of those is to say player.avatar_scale.set to 1. We want to reset their avatar scale whenever we teleport them to the player to the lobby. And so this makes it so we only have to write one line of code everywhere we need to teleport the player. So we're done here, Control Save. And inside of our game manager function, we were also teleporting the player to the lobby. Let's see, right here, here it is. And so we can remove this and change this with spawn point function dot teleport player to lobby, parentheses player. And ideally, that's it. If you get into doing this really late in your status, you can go to the search button over here and type teleport player, which is spawn point function, or spawn point gizmos have the teleport player, and we can just go through and find all the places where it's being used. So here we can see we're using it correctly. Here we can see we are using it. It's okay to use it here because this is just teleporting them into the game. This is where our error is, by the way. It's because we haven't set a value for is it. So we can say is active :true, comma, role, colon, and we could use other, or we could use not it. I'm going to use not it as the default role because we're really just assigning them to be it. You could use other though. It's kind of up to you on how you want to set that up and why. You might have reasons. Okay, and then we'll keep going through this search. We can see this is using spawn point function, which is correct. This one is the function itself. This is also the function. This is also the function. And then the final one here is where this is defined in Horizon Core. So we've just gone through and looked for everywhere teleport player is and verified that we did correctly utilize this function in all cases that were needed. So that's done. And oh my gosh, this has been a lot. But we will be able to visually see who the player is. We fixed all the bugs. So we're done with VS Code. We're just about wrapped up here for today. Let's go and try this out. Jump into play mode. And so we're going to have to hit reset button. There we go. Jump into preview mode. So now we're going to walk in, and you can notice that they're the same size. I come in, one of us got bigger. There we go. As I leave, we both get respawned and rescaled back to normal scale. And we can do that another time, and theoretically 50% of the time I should be it. So we'll try that one more time. Here we are. Oh, well, look at I'm it. And now if we wait 18 seconds, we should see that we both get teleported and reset scale, and our loop is complete. Now, what you add to that loop, what you make happen during the loop, that is up to you. Where this space is and all of that, quite a bit. But from the coding side, you've now seen it. So you've seen how it works behind the scenes. It is absolutely a ton. I try to jam pack it all into one video, so feel free to rewatch this a couple times. Once you feel comfortable with this, highly encourage you to check out player data. I think it's going to expand in a way that's really helpful to see how you can store so much more data on the player other than just the role and is active. So any other questions you have? I'm going to quickly read through the chat before we wrap today's call. Really appreciate everybody jumping in today. Thanks, Lexi. Thank you, Jeff. You can make an enum Yes. I don't use enums though. I just haven't enjoyed them. Union. I'm not super familiar with unions, but great suggestions. Reading through, I think we've covered everything here. So yeah, so great to have you guys all joining in the live stream. I just thought this would be a lot easier to get the information out. I know we already posted a video today, so this is like 2 in a day. I'm even thinking about a third one. I'm not going to because I'm already like getting to the end of my ability for today, but it's great. It's great. I hope this helps. Please do leave questions in the chat. Join us on Discord because I don't always get notifications via YouTube about the messages you guys are leaving as comments, so apologies there. But Discord I do check very much every day, so would love to have you there. Links in the description. Other than that, if you've somehow stumbled upon here without knowing about the Thinking Like a Programmer, this is a part of the Thinking Like a Programmer summer series that I'm creating. You can check out that playlist and on the YouTube channel, and that will have a bunch of great starting points, and ideally I'm helping you become a TypeScript programmer. So okie doke, I will see you guys. Oh, I made the union. Cool, yeah, got it. I guess I just didn't know what the name was. Thanks for telling me that's what a union is. Ay, ay, ay. This is what a self-taught programmer looks like. I'm sorry. I've only learned so much, and I'm still learning. I'm still very much learning, and appreciate I get to learn with you guys. So, bye!